Sometimes life changes in a moment, a single choice, a single encounter that flips everything you thought you knew upside down. For Marcus Turner, it started on a rainy night with flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. What seemed like just another routine traffic stop became the spark that would ignite something much bigger, a chain of events that forced him to confront his past, his purpose, and his place in the world. But Marcus was not the only one on a journey. In a quiet corner of the city, at a worn-out community center, he crossed paths with DeAndre, a stubborn, angry kid with untapped potential and walls built so high no one could see inside. Together, these two lives collided in ways neither of them expected, pushing both of them to face their fears, their doubts, and the stories they believed about themselves. What does it mean to show up for someone else? How do you heal when the world feels broken? And can the smallest acts of kindness really change a life, maybe even two? Marcus Turner gripped the wheel a little tighter as his old sedan crawled through the rain-soaked streets of Clayton Hill. The headlights cut through the dark evening, reflecting off puddles and shimmering across empty sidewalks. The windshield wipers thumped rhythmically, doing their best to keep up with the drizzle. It had been a long day, one of those days where your feet ached from standing too long and your brain felt like a bowl of scrambled eggs. Marcus had spent 12 hours at the warehouse, moving boxes and loading pallets, just to earn a paycheck that barely stretched far enough. Almost home, he muttered under his breath. His apartment was a small one-bedroom in a crumbling complex on the edge of town. The paint peeled off the walls, and the pipes groaned every time someone turned on the tap. But it was his, and he took care of it as best he could. He often reminded himself that it was better than where he had come from, a crowded childhood home with barely enough space for him and his sister, Rebecca. Marcus glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 9:47 p.m. It was later than he thought. He was supposed to call Rebecca earlier, but fatigue had gotten the best of him. She always worried about him, even though he was the older brother. She had a good job as a nurse and offered to help him with money more than once, but Marcus never took it. He had pride, and his pride kept him going. He did not want handouts. He did not want pity. As the road stretched ahead, Marcus noticed how quiet it was, too quiet. The usual hum of Clayton Hill's nightlife seemed muted tonight. Something about it made his chest feel tight, like the air had grown heavier without him noticing. Then it happened. Red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Marcus's heart sank into his stomach. The police cruiser appeared out of nowhere, gliding behind him like a predator stalking its prey. His pulse quickened as he pulled the car to the curb, his hands instinctively moving to the steering wheel 10 and 2. He had practiced this 1,000 times in his head. Stay calm. Do not make any sudden movements. Keep your voice steady. What now? He whispered to himself. He knew he had done nothing wrong. His taillights were fine. His plates were up to date. He had not been speeding. He swallowed hard as the cruiser door opened, and a heavy-set figure stepped out. The officer's boots crunched against the wet pavement, slow and deliberate. The man approached Marcus's window with the kind of confidence that told the world he was used to being in charge. The officer knocked on the glass twice, sharp and impatient. Marcus rolled the window down halfway. "Good evening, officer." His voice was steady, though his insides felt like a coil of wire tightening. "Can I ask why you pulled me over?" The officer's face came into view. He was middle-aged, stocky, and pale-skinned with a rigid jawline. His badge read Hendricks. "You were driving suspiciously slow," Hendricks said flatly, his eyes squinting like Marcus was trying to pull one over on him. "Where are you headed?" Marcus blinked. "Suspiciously slow? Was that even a thing?" "I'm just heading home, sir. It is raining, and I was being careful." Hendricks leaned in closer, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "Careful, huh? You got something to hide, pal?" That word "pal" rolled off his tongue like an insult. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "No, sir. I have nothing to hide. License and registration." Hendricks held out his hand, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Marcus reached slowly toward the glove compartment. Every move was deliberate. He did not want any misunderstandings tonight. He handed over the papers, and Hendricks snatched them like Marcus had thrown a hot coal into his palm. "Wait here," the officer barked before stomping back to his cruiser. Marcus watched him in the side mirror, his shoulders sinking slightly as frustration bubbled up inside him. He could see it all playing out in his head. The waiting, the suspicion, the unspoken accusation. He had been through this before. It never mattered how polite he was, how calm he stayed, or how spotless his record was. Sometimes people only saw what they wanted to see. The rain picked up, tapping against the roof of the car. Marcus stared straight ahead, his breath fogging up the windshield. He thought of Rebecca's voice in his head, always reminding him, "Keep your head up, Marcus. Mama used to say, life's hard, but your spirit is tougher." Hendricks returned a few minutes later, his expression unreadable. "Step out of the car," he ordered. Marcus turned to look at him. "Sir, what is the reason for this?" "I said step out of the car." Hendricks's voice grew sharper. Marcus sighed heavily. Arguing would not help. He opened the door and stepped into the rain, the cold dampness biting through his thin jacket. "Open the trunk," Hendricks said, nodding toward the back of the car. "With all due respect, officer, you need a warrant for that." Marcus's voice was firm but respectful. He knew his rights. A smirk twisted Hendricks's lips. "Wrong. I can check whatever I want. Open it." Marcus felt his chest tighten again. This was not right. "You are violating my rights," he said louder this time. Hendricks ignored him and moved to the trunk himself, fumbling with his keyring as if he owned the car. Marcus stood there, rain sliding down his face, his fists clenched at his sides. It was not the wetness that made his skin feel hot, it was the helplessness. The trunk opened with a creak. Hendricks's flashlight flicked on, illuminating the space. There, in the corner, sat a sleek gray document case. Marcus saw Hendricks's smirk widen as he reached for it. "Hey, that is private property." Marcus snapped, his voice cutting through the rain. Hendricks ignored him. He unlatched the case with a click and opened it like he was unwrapping a birthday gift. And then, something changed. Hendricks froze. His smirk disappeared, replaced by a look Marcus had never seen before: shock. The officer's face turned pale, his hands trembling as he held the top sheet of paper closer to his face. Marcus did not need to see it. He knew what it was. Notice of termination. Beneath those words was Officer Scott Hendricks's full name. And beneath that was a detailed list of complaints and misconduct offenses that painted an ugly picture. At the bottom of the page sat the signature of the police chief, James Peterson. Hendricks's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Marcus, his eyes wide, the rain dripping from his hat like tears. Marcus crossed his arms, watching the man crumble. "Something catch your eye, Officer Hendricks?" The officer's hands shook as he folded the paper and slid it back into the case like it might bite him. "Well, where did you get this?" His voice was no longer commanding. It was a whisper. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "That is none of your concern. The question is, why did you violate my rights to find it?" Hendricks did not respond. He looked down at the paper again, his expression a mix of panic and disbelief. For the first time, Marcus saw the man behind the uniform, the one who was losing everything. Marcus's voice softened, though the edge still remained. "You do not know me, officer, but you just made the biggest mistake of your career. You think you can treat people however you want, but sooner or later, it catches up to you." Hendricks stumbled back, the paper still clutched in his hand. This is not real." "Oh, it is very real." Marcus met his eyes. "And you're going to have to answer for it." The rain kept falling, heavier now, but Marcus no longer felt cold. He felt a strange sense of calm. For years, he had felt invisible, powerless. But tonight was different. Tonight, he stood tall, not because he wanted revenge, but because he knew it was time for change. "This is not over," Hendricks muttered, though his voice lacked the conviction it once held. Marcus turned and walked back to his car, leaving the man in the rain. As he climbed into the driver's seat and shut the door, he let out a long breath. His heart was still pounding, but something else had settled in his chest, something that felt a little like hope. It was not the end of the road. He knew that much. But maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something better. The rain had stopped by the time Marcus pulled into the cracked parking lot of his apartment complex. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, his mind replaying the scene with Officer Hendricks like a film stuck on an endless loop. The way the officer froze when he saw his own name on that termination notice was burned into Marcus's memory, a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief swirling in his chest. He shut off the engine and leaned back against the seat, staring through the windshield at the dimly lit building. The complex was as worn out as ever, the kind of place people drove past without a second glance. Paint chipped off the siding like dead skin, and rust crawled up the metal railings of the stairwells. A flickering light buzzed in the parking lot, casting broken shadows on the pavement. Marcus sighed and ran a hand over his face. He had hoped the evening would end quietly. A shower, a warm bed, silence. Instead, he got this a confrontation that left him with a hollow victory. Finally, he grabbed his bag and climbed out of the car. His boots scraped against the gravel as he trudged toward the stairwell. From one of the apartments, someone's TV blared faintly through the thin walls, the muffled laughter of a sitcom audience drifting into the night. The building always felt alive but empty, at the same time a collection of tired people just trying to get by. Inside his apartment, the air was cool and still. Marcus flipped the light switch, illuminating the small living room. A second-hand couch sat against the wall, worn but clean. The coffee table had a few stray pieces of mail and an old mug. Across from it, the kitchen was barely more than a counter, a stove, and a rattling refrigerator. Dropping his bag by the door, Marcus peeled off his wet jacket and hung it over the back of a chair. The silence felt heavy. He sank onto the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Why did it feel like a win and a loss all at once? Hendrix's face lingered in his mind, pale, shaking, the swagger replaced with fear. Marcus had dreamed of moments like this before, where people like Hendrix got what they deserved. But now that it had actually happened, it felt empty. You think you can treat people however you want, but sooner or later, it catches up to you, Marcus muttered to himself, repeating the words he had said to Hendrix. He shook his head. He knew why it felt empty. Because nothing had really changed. Sure, he had caught Hendrix off guard, but what now? Tomorrow, the world would keep turning. Another officer would abuse their power. Another person like Marcus would feel powerless. He leaned back and let out a long breath. The ceiling fan spun lazily above him, its faint hum filling the quiet room. For years, Marcus had kept his head down, staying out of trouble, doing his best to live a quiet, honest life. But it never seemed to matter. People like Hendrix always found a reason to look at him like he was less than. His phone buzzed on the table, snapping him out of his thoughts. Marcus glanced at the screen. Rebecca calling. He stared at it for a moment before answering. Hey, Becky. Marcus, where have you been? Her voice was soft, but there was worry in it, as always. You said you would call me after work. I was about to come hunt you down. Marcus let out a tired chuckle. It has been a long night. Is everything okay? Marcus hesitated. Rebecca did not need to know about what happened. She would worry. Yeah, I am just tired, that is all. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, as if trying to read between his words. Marcus, you have got to take better care of yourself. You work too hard, and I know you hate asking for help, but I am fine, Becky. His voice was sharper than he meant it to be. He sighed. Sorry, I did not mean that. I do not want you worrying about me. I'm always going to worry about you, Marcus. You are my brother. Her voice softened. Are you sure you are okay? Marcus ran a hand over his head. He wanted to say something to let her in on what was running through his mind, but he could not find the words. I will be fine, he said finally. I just need some sleep. Rebecca did not push. She never did. Okay, just promise me you will take care of yourself. I promise. They said their goodnights, and Marcus set the phone back on the table. He sat there for a while, the quiet wrapping around him like a heavy blanket. His thoughts drifted back to that night, Hendrix's smirk, the rain, the way the power shifted in an instant. Marcus wondered what would happen next. Would Hendrix lose his job for good? Would the story spread? Does it even matter? He shook his head and stood up. Worrying would not solve anything. He grabbed a towel from the small linen closet and stepped into the bathroom. The water sputtered and groaned through the pipes before it ran hot, steam rising from the old tiles. Marcus let the water hit him, closing his eyes as the heat soaked into his skin. It felt good, like it was washing away the tension of the night, if only for a moment. But the thoughts crept back in. As the water poured over him, he remembered his mother's voice from years ago. She used to tell him and Rebecca stories when they were kids, stories about kindness, about resilience. "You cannot control how the world treats you," she would say, sitting on the edge of their bed. "But you can control how you treat others. Do not let the world harden you." Marcus opened his eyes and turned off the water. He grabbed the towel, dried himself, and stepped into his small bedroom. The bed was made, as always. His mother had taught him that to take care of the small things, and the big things will follow. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the window. Outside, the streetlights cast faint shadows against the walls. The quiet seemed to stretch on forever. Marcus thought about Rebecca and how hard she worked to build her life. He thought about all the nights she stayed up studying to become a nurse, no matter how tired she was. She never gave up. Maybe that was the lesson: keep moving forward, no matter what. But where am I moving? He wondered. What was he supposed to do now? He had always been content to stay in the background, to live a quiet life. But tonight something felt different, like a door had cracked open, and he was standing on the other side, staring into the unknown. His phone buzzed again. A message. He frowned and picked it up. "Unknown number. You made some noise tonight. People are going to talk." Marcus's brow furrowed as he stared at the words. The message made his chest feel tight again. He set the phone down and shook his head. He did not have the energy to deal with it tonight. Instead, he lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The quiet was heavy, but it was not peaceful. Marcus's mind raced as the hours stretched on. What was he supposed to do with all of this? He thought of Rebecca again. He thought of his mother. He thought of the way Hendricks looked at him, like a man who had just seen his life unravel in front of him. Marcus closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he decided he would try to figure it out. For now, he just needed to sleep. The morning sun crept through Marcus's thin curtains, slicing the dim room into streaks of light and shadow. He woke up with a dull ache in his chest, the kind that came from too little sleep and too many unanswered questions. He stared at the ceiling for a moment before swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The quiet hum of the world waking up outside his window did little to calm his mind. Last night's events still hovered over him like a storm cloud. He could not shake the look on Hendrix's face when he realized the truth, the fear, the disbelief. Marcus had won the moment, but the emptiness remained. He stood and shuffled into the kitchen, grabbing a half-empty box of cereal from the counter. Pouring it into a chipped bowl, Marcus listened to the faint sounds of life outside, kids running past on their way to school, an engine sputtering as someone tried to start their car. The world moved on, whether he was ready or not. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking his train of thought. Marcus frowned and picked it up. It was a message from Rebecca. "Rebecca, morning. Call me later. Don't make me hunt you down, Marcus." A faint smile tugged at his lips. Rebecca always found a way to pull him out of his head. He typed a quick reply, "Will do." As he set the phone down, he noticed something else, a number he did not recognize, the same one from last night. The message was still there. "You made some noise tonight. People are going to talk." Marcus stared at it, his thumb hovering over the screen. He had not responded then, and he would not now. Whoever it was, whatever their angle, Marcus was not interested. He had enough on his plate without adding mystery text to the mix. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud knock at the door. The sound startled him, and for a split second, his heart raced. Marcus put the bowl down and moved to the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. It was a woman, small in stature, but confident in how she stood, shoulders squared, a messenger bag slung across her chest. She looked familiar, though Marcus could not place her. He opened the door halfway. "Can I help you?" "Marcus Turner?" she asked, her voice clear, but not unkind. "Who's asking?" She held out a card. "Clara Ramirez. I work with legal aid here in Clayton Hill. Do you mind if we talk?" Marcus stared at the card before looking back at her. "Legal aid? What for?" "I heard about what happened last night." Marcus stiffened. He kept his expression neutral, but his insides churned. How did she hear about that already? "And?" Clara tilted her head slightly, studying him. "I think you have more power in this situation than you realize." Marcus frowned. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about." "Can I come in for a minute?" she interrupted gently. I promise I won't take up much of your time. Marcus hesitated. He wanted to shut the door and end the conversation, but something about the way she spoke gave him pause. There was no judgment in her voice, no arrogance, just calm persistence. With a reluctant sigh, he opened the door wider and stepped aside. Make it quick. Clara walked in and looked around briefly. She did not comment on the small, sparsely furnished space. Instead, she pulled a chair out from the kitchen table and sat down, uninvited but unassuming. Marcus stood nearby, arms crossed. So, what is this about? Marcus asked. Clara set her bag on the table and opened it, pulling out a folder. Let me start by saying that what happened last night shouldn't have happened. You know that. I know that. Marcus narrowed his eyes. What exactly do you know? Enough to know that Officer Hendricks overstepped. Clara met his gaze evenly. You didn't break any laws, Marcus. He did. And when he found that document in your trunk, the tables turned. I'm guessing it wasn't supposed to be there. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. No, it wasn't. I was delivering papers for a friend of mine who works with the department. They had asked me to drop it off today. Clara nodded, unfazed. Lucky timing, I suppose. But that's not the point. The point is Hendricks's behavior crossed a line, and you have every right to make sure something comes of it. Marcus let out a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. Yeah? And what good would that do? You think people like him don't get away with stuff like this every day? Clara leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the table. Not always. Sometimes, all it takes is someone standing up and saying enough. Why do you care? Marcus asked, his voice sharp. You don't even know me. Because I've seen too many people let moments like this pass them by, Clara replied without missing a beat. They think it's pointless to fight, so they don't. And nothing changes. But you, Marcus, you're not invisible anymore. You have a voice now. What happened last night gives you the chance to use it. Marcus looked away, her words settling in his chest like stones. He did not want this. He had not asked to be the center of anything. All he wanted was to live his life in peace. I'm not interested in getting involved, he muttered finally. Whatever happens to Hendricks is not my problem. Clara watched him for a moment before nodding slowly. Fair enough. But let me ask you something. If this was someone else, would you tell them the same thing? To walk away? Marcus frowned, her question hitting a nerve. He thought about Rebecca, about the countless people in his neighborhood who dealt with things like this all the time and never said a word. He had always told himself it was not his fight. But now it was. Clara stood and slid her card across the table. Think about it, she said softly. You don't have to decide anything right now. If you change your mind, give me a call. Marcus did not reply. He watched as she slung her bag over her shoulder and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned back to him. Sometimes the loudest change starts with one person, she said. Don't let this moment pass you by, Marcus. The door clicked shut behind her, and Marcus stood in the middle of his apartment, staring at the card on the table. Clara Ramirez. Legal aid. What does she want from me? He wondered, but deep down he already knew the answer. She wanted him to do something with what had happened, to stand up, to fight back. Marcus dropped into the chair she had just left, running a hand over his face. He could still feel the weight of last night pressing on him, and now this. A part of him wanted to throw the card away and pretend none of it had happened. But another part, the part that had been growing louder and louder over the years, whispered that maybe Clara was right. Maybe this was his chance. The thought scared him. Marcus picked up the card and turned it over in his hands. He stared at it for a long time, the quiet of his apartment pressing in around him. Outside, the sound of kids laughing and cars passing reminded him that the world kept moving. He thought of his mother's words again, the ones he always tried to forget. You can't control how the world treats you, Marcus, but you can control how you respond. For the first time in a long time, Marcus wondered what it would feel like to respond, to fight, to make a change. He set the card down carefully and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as sunlight spilled across the floor. He was not ready yet, but maybe he would be. Marcus sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the card Clara Ramirez had left behind the day before. The sunlight streaming through the window painted it in a soft glow, making it stand out even more against the cluttered surface. Marcus had tried ignoring it, shoving it to the side, but his eyes kept drifting back to it like a magnet. He sighed and pushed the card away again. The message was clear. Clara wanted him to stand up, to use the incident with Officer Hendricks as a stepping stone for something bigger. But Marcus was not sure he was that kind of person. It was not in his nature to make waves. He had spent his entire life trying to avoid them. The knock at his door startled him out of his thoughts. For a moment, his heart jumped. He was not used to visitors. Standing up, he crossed the room cautiously and looked through the peephole. It was Clara again. Marcus groaned under his breath, but opened the door, squinting at her in the morning light. "You really don't give up, do you?" Clara smiled, unfazed. "Good morning to you, too." Marcus shook his head and stepped aside, motioning her in. "If I let you keep coming by, you're going to think you live here. I'll bring coffee next time." She walked in and dropped her messenger bag onto the table, looking around briefly before her eyes landed on the card. "Looks like you've been thinking." "Doesn't mean I've decided anything," Marcus replied quickly. Clara pulled out a chair and sat down, facing him. "Marcus, I get it. Taking a step like this is hard. But you don't have to do it alone. There's something I want you to see." Marcus frowned, arms crossed. "See what?" "Come with me for an hour," she said simply. "That's all I'm asking. If you still feel the same afterward, I won't push anymore." Marcus studied her. Clara had this way of speaking, steady, calm, but persistent, like she already knew the outcome and was just waiting for him to catch up. He let out a long sigh. "Phoenix, an hour. But that's it." Clara smiled. "Deal." Marcus followed Clara's car through the streets of Clayton Hill, the familiar road stretching out like a map of his life. The city had never felt like much to him, just a place he existed, day in and day out. A place where people struggled and fell through the cracks. Clara pulled into a lot in front of an old brick building with faded green shutters. The sign above the entrance read, "Peters Community Center." Kids and teenagers milled around outside, some laughing and others focused on their phones. Marcus climbed out of his car and walked over to Clara, who was waiting for him by the door. "What is this place?" "This," she said, motioning toward the building, "is where change starts. Come on." Marcus followed her inside. The smell of old books and fresh paint filled the air. The walls were lined with bulletin boards covered in flyers, job postings, GED classes, community events. They passed a group of kids playing basketball in a small gym and a woman leading a cooking class in a brightly lit kitchen. The place buzzed with quiet energy, a sense of purpose that Marcus had not felt in a long time. Clara led him down a hallway and into a room at the end. It was a simple space, folding chairs arranged in a circle, a few posters on the walls about self-improvement and growth. In the middle of the room stood an older man with silver hair and a sturdy frame. He turned when they walked in, his eyes crinkling with a friendly smile. "Sam, this is Marcus Turner," Clara said. "Marcus, meet Samuel Peters." Sam stepped forward and extended his hand. His grip was strong, his presence steady. "Good to meet you, Marcus. Clara's been talking about you." Marcus shot her a sideways glance. "Yeah, I'll bet she has." Sam chuckled. "Come on, sit down. We're just getting started." Marcus followed Sam's lead and sat in one of the chairs. Clara took a seat next to him. As the room filled, Marcus noticed the other people trickling in, mostly teenagers, a few older adults. Some looked rough around the edges, like life had knocked them down a few too many times. Others just looked tired. "All right, everyone," Sam said, clapping his hands together to get their attention. "Let's start with some introductions. We got a guest today, Marcus. Would you mind telling us a little about yourself?" Marcus shifted in his seat, suddenly uncomfortable with all the eyes on him. There's not much to tell. My name's Marcus. I work at the warehouse on the south side." Sam nodded, unbothered by the brevity. "Thanks, Marcus. Anyone else want to share?" One by one, people began speaking, some reluctantly, others with ease. A teenage boy named DeAndre sat across from Marcus, his arms crossed and his chin tilted up like he was daring someone to challenge him. When it was his turn, he shrugged. "I'm DeAndre," he said flatly. "I'm here 'cause my mom thinks it'll keep me out of trouble." Some smiled kindly. "Well, DeAndre, we're glad you're here, even if you don't think you need us yet." Marcus watched the boy, recognizing the defiance in his posture. He had been that kid, once the one who thought the world was against him, who pushed back just to prove he was still standing. As the group continued talking, Marcus listened quietly. They shared small victories. One man talked about finding steady work, while a teenage girl celebrated passing her math test. Sam's voice carried a calm wisdom as he guided the conversation, encouraging without pushing. When the session ended, Sam approached Marcus as the room began to clear out. "So, what do you think?" Marcus shrugged. "It's different. I didn't expect this." Sam licked softly. "Most people don't. That's the point." Clara stepped forward, her expression hopeful. "Marcus, this place helps people find their footing again. You saw it yourself. The kids, the adults, they come here because someone gives them a chance." Marcus frowned. "What's that got to do with me?" Sam looked at him carefully. "You've been through something, Marcus. I can see it. You've got the kind of story these kids need to hear, something real. You'd be surprised how much you can help just by showing up." Marcus looked away, shaking his head. "I don't know. I'm not some role model." "You don't have to be perfect," Sam said. "You just have to be honest." Marcus's mind flashed to DeAndre, the way the boy sat there, angry at the world, the way Marcus had felt so many times before. He swallowed hard, pushing the thought away. "I'll think about it. That's all we're asking," Clara said with a small smile. On the drive home, Marcus felt unsettled. The community center had stirred something in him, something he was not ready to face yet. When he got back to his apartment, he sat in his car for a long time, staring at the cracked dashboard. He thought about Sam and Clara, about the kids at the center, about DeAndre. He thought about his own life, how many times he had felt invisible, like no one cared whether he made it or not. Clara's words echoed in his head. "You don't have to do it alone." Marcus leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to stop running from the world. He opened his eyes, stared out at the horizon, and made a quiet promise to himself. Tomorrow, he would go back. The next morning, Marcus stood at his window, watching the city wake up. Cars rolled sluggishly through the streets, horns blaring faintly in the distance. The sun had barely climbed above the horizon, casting a gray light across the cracked pavement below. His old apartment building felt quieter than usual, like the world was waiting for him to make a move. Marcus sighed, rubbing his face as he glanced at the card Clara had left him. Peter's Community Center. The name sat heavy in his mind, tugging at something deep in his chest. He had not slept much. The images of the people at the center, their stories, their struggles kept looping through his head. DeAndre's face, especially, stuck with him. That kid's anger reminded Marcus of himself at that age, when life felt like a battle he could not win. But something had happened in that room. He had seen it in their voices, in their eyes' hope. They came because someone cared enough to show up. Marcus ran a hand over his head, then grabbed his keys. He had promised himself he would go back. Maybe he could show up for someone too. When Marcus pulled into the parking lot of the Peters Community Center, he felt like he was seeing the place with new eyes. The faded brick walls and scuffed-up windows should have made it look tired, but there was something else, a quiet life buzzing beneath the surface. Kids were already there, kicking a soccer ball in the field next to the building. A couple of older teens leaned against the wall, talking and laughing as if they had nowhere else to be. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. He felt out of place here, like he was walking into someone else's world. He hesitated at the door for just a second before pushing it open. Inside, the energy was the same as yesterday. The gym echoed with the sound of sneakers squeaking against the floor. A teacher led a small group through a cooking lesson in the kitchen, the faint smell of bread hanging in the air. Marcus spotted Sam near the end of the hallway, talking to a group of kids gathered around him. The older man's voice carried that same calm authority Marcus had noticed before, steady, warm, and patient. Sam caught sight of him and raised a hand. "Marcus, good to see you, man." Marcus gave him a small nod as he approached. "Morning." Sam clapped him on the shoulder, his smile broad. "Glad you came back. I had a feeling you might." "Yeah, well," Marcus shrugged. "Figured I'd see what all this was about." Sam chuckled, as if he could see right through him. "You're in luck. Today's a busy day. I've got a group of kids I want you to meet. Some of them could use a little extra attention." Hold up, Marcus said, stopping short. I didn't sign up for all that. You signed up when you walked through that door, Sam replied with a wink. Come on, I'll make it easy for you. Marcus sighed and followed Sam into a small room off the gym. The space had mismatched chairs, a couple of beanbags in the corner, and posters of motivational quotes taped to the walls. A group of kids were already there, some whispering to each other, others staring at their phones. Marcus froze when he saw DeAndre sitting in the back of the room. The boy looked up, his expression hardening the instant their eyes met. Oh, great, DeAndre muttered. The new guy's back. Sam ignored him and motioned for Marcus to follow. DeAndre's got a mouth on him, but he's a good kid. He just doesn't know it yet. Marcus glanced at Sam. You sure about that? Sam grinned. Trust me. Marcus sighed again and sat down in an empty chair near the front of the room. He felt the kid's eyes on him, sizing him up. Sam stood by the whiteboard and clapped his hands once. Listen up, everyone. This is Marcus. He's here to help out today. A chorus of murmured whatevers and sarcastic remarks followed. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but Sam did not seem to notice. Let's talk about choices today, Sam continued, his voice calm. Big ones, small ones, every choice we make shapes who we are. What kind of choices have you all made recently? The kids muttered responses, some serious, others joking. One boy said he chose to get out of bed this morning. Another girl talked about helping her mom clean the house. When DeAndre's turn came, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. I chose not to punch a guy yesterday. That's progress, right? A couple of kids laughed, but Sam only smiled. That is progress. But what made you stop yourself? DeAndre shifted in his seat, his expression darkening. Didn't seem worth it. What's the point? Marcus felt his chest tighten. He knew that feeling too well. What about you, Marcus? Sam said suddenly, turning toward him. Tell us about a choice you've made recently. Marcus blinked, caught off guard. The kid's eyes were on him again, waiting to hear what he would say. He thought about Hendrix, about the choice to stay quiet or stand up for himself. He thought about the community center and how easy it would have been to walk away and never come back. Finally, he cleared his throat. I chose to come here today, he said simply. DeAndre snorted. What? You didn't have anything better to do? Marcus looked at him directly. Maybe not, but maybe this was better than doing nothing. The boy's smirk faltered for half a second before he looked away, his arms still crossed. Sam smiled. That's the thing about choices, DeAndre. Sometimes the small ones make the biggest difference. After the group session ended, Marcus lingered near the doorway, watching the kids file out. DeAndre brushed past him, his expression unreadable. Hey, Marcus said, stopping him. DeAndre turned, looking annoyed. What? You remind me of someone I used to know, Marcus said carefully. DeAndre raised an eyebrow. Yeah? Who's that? Marcus hesitated, then shrugged. Me. DeAndre scoffed, his walls going back up. Whatever, man. He walked off, disappearing down the hallway. Marcus let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. He turned to find Sam watching him with a small smile. You handled that well, Sam said. Did I? Marcus shook his head. Kid's stubborn. Sam chuckled. He's got potential. You just have to break through. Yeah, well, I'm not exactly good at this, Marcus replied. You don't have to be good at it. You just have to show up. Marcus thought about that as he walked to his car later that afternoon. Show up. The words echoed in his mind. It sounded simple, but Marcus knew it was harder than it seemed. Still, something about today felt different. He had not fixed anything, but he had taken a step forward. He had shown up. As Marcus climbed into his car, he spotted DeAndre across the parking lot, sitting on the curb with his headphones on. For a brief second, the boy looked up, and their eyes met. DeAndre quickly looked away, but Marcus could see something in his expression, curiosity, maybe. Marcus started the car and pulled out of the lot, the words still echoing in his mind. Just show up. Maybe that was how it started. Marcus had not planned on coming back to the community center so soon, but by the time the next day rolled around, something inside him pulled him back. Maybe it was the way Sam spoke, like he already knew Marcus could make a difference. Or maybe it was DeAndre. That kid reminded him too much of his younger self, and Marcus could not shake the feeling that just maybe he was supposed to be there. The drive to the center was quiet. Marcus's old sedan rumbled along the same roads he took every day to work, but this time they felt different. He was heading somewhere that did not feel like a burden or a paycheck. It felt like purpose. It was a feeling he did not know what to do with yet. When Marcus walked inside, the place was already alive. Kids were running through the hallways. Adults sat in small groups at tables, and the faint sound of basketballs thumping echoed through the gym. It was noisy, but in a way that felt hopeful. Marcus found Sam in the office near the front, shuffling through a stack of papers with a pen tucked behind his ear. Sam looked up when Marcus knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Well, look who's back," Sam said, smiling. "Twice in 2 days. That's got to be some kind of record." Yeah, Marcus muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "I figured I'd check in. Maybe help out again." Sam's eyes twinkled with that quiet wisdom Marcus was starting to recognize. "I knew you would. Come on. I got something for you." Marcus followed Sam down the hall to a small meeting room where a group of teenagers sat slouched in chairs, most of them glued to their phones. Marcus's stomach tightened when he spotted DeAndre sitting off to the side, hood up, legs stretched out like he did not have a care in the world. "Morning, everyone," Sam called out, his voice loud enough to pull their attention. "I got a new friend helping me today. Y'all remember Marcus?" A couple of the kids gave half-hearted nods, but most just stared. DeAndre glanced up briefly, his face blank, before turning his gaze back to his phone. Sam clapped Marcus on the shoulder. "He's going to run this group session for me. I've got a meeting to get to." Marcus turned to him, startled. "Wait, what? You didn't say anything about—" "You'll be fine," Sam interrupted with a grin. "Just talk to them. Let them get to know you. That's all." And with that, Sam was gone. Marcus turned back to the group, suddenly feeling like he had been thrown into the deep end of the pool. He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and cleared his throat. "All right, I guess it's just us today." No one said anything. A girl in the corner chewed her gum loudly, and someone else snickered under their breath. Marcus sighed. "Look, I'm not here to lecture you. I'm not some counselor or teacher. I'm just me. So how about we start simple? What's your name, and what's something you want out of life?" Silence. DeAndre spoke first, not looking up from his phone. "What if I don't want anything?" The room shifted as a couple of kids chuckled. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to keep his tone calm. "Everybody wants something. You just may not know it yet." DeAndre glanced up, his eyes sharp. "You think you know me?" Marcus met his stare evenly. "No, but I know what it's like to feel like you don't care about anything. I've been there." DeAndre raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? What did you do about it?" Marcus hesitated, the room growing quiet again. He had not expected to get personal, but he knew he had to give something if he wanted them to listen. "I was angry at the world," Marcus said slowly. "I grew up in a house where we never had enough money, food, space. My mom did her best, but it was never easy. I figured life was just unfair, and I carried that around for a long time." He paused, scanning the room. The kids were actually listening now, even if they tried to hide it. DeAndre stared at him with an expression Marcus could not quite read. "What changed?" someone asked quietly. Marcus shifted in his seat. "My sister. She never gave up on me. She worked hard, went to school, and built a better life. She kept telling me I could do it too. And eventually, I believed her." DeAndre scoffed lightly. "So, you're saying we just need someone to save us, huh?" "No," Marcus said firmly, leaning forward. "Nobody's going to save you. You have to save yourself. But sometimes, it helps to know someone's in your corner. That's what this place is about." For a moment, no one said anything. The room felt heavier now, like the walls were absorbing Marcus's words. Finally, DeAndre spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Sounds nice. Not everyone's that lucky." Marcus nodded, his tone softening. "You're right, but you're lucky to have this place. Some cares. The people here care. And I'm telling you, you don't have to figure it all out right now. Just show up. That's the first step." The group lapsed into silence, but it was different now, less defensive, more thoughtful. Marcus could feel the shift. It was not a breakthrough, not yet, but it was something. After the session, Marcus sat on the steps outside the community center, letting the crisp air clear his head. He had not expected to share so much, but it felt good in a strange way, like he had unloaded a weight he did not know he was carrying. The door creaked open behind him, and Marcus turned to see DeAndre stepping outside. The boy shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets and stared at the ground for a moment before speaking. "You really mean all that stuff you said in there?" DeAndre asked, not looking up. "Yeah," Marcus replied. "Every word." DeAndre kicked at a rock near his foot. "How do you know it's worth it?" I mean? Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Because doing nothing's worse." DeAndre looked up then, his eyes searching Marcus's face like he was trying to find the lie. After a moment, he nodded slightly and turned to leave, muttering, "See you around, I guess." Marcus watched him walk off, a small flicker of hope rising in his chest. It was not much, but it was a start. "Nice work," a voice said behind him. Marcus turned to see Sam leaning against the doorway, arms crossed and a proud smile on his face. "That kid's tough," Marcus said, shaking his head. "Yeah, somebody plight. But you got through to him more than you think. Keep showing up, Marcus. That's all it takes." Marcus looked back at the street where DeAndre had disappeared, the boy's words still lingering in his mind. "How do you know it's worth it?" The truth was Marcus did not know yet, but he was starting to believe it could be. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Marcus stood up and tucked his hands into his jacket pockets. He did not have all the answers, but he had taken another step. And for now, that was enough. Marcus woke up early the next morning, the events of the previous day still lingering in his mind. Sitting at the edge of his bed, he rubbed his hands together slowly, the chill of the early morning air settling on his skin. It had been years since he had felt this restless, but not in a bad way. It was like something inside him had started to shift, like the wheels of his life, which had been stuck for so long, were finally turning again. He thought about DeAndre, the kid who reminded him so much of his younger self. Tough on the outside, but hiding something deeper underneath. Marcus had seen it in his eyes. DeAndre wanted to believe in something, but life had taught him to expect the worst. Marcus knew that feeling too well. After a quick shower and a cup of black coffee, Marcus grabbed his keys and headed out the door. His car sputtered as it came to life, the old engine complaining in the cold. He did not have to work today, but that was fine. There was somewhere else he needed to be. When Marcus walked into the Peters Community Center, it felt less like walking into someone else's world and more like returning to a place that had started to feel familiar. Sam was already there, standing in the main hallway, talking to a woman with a clipboard. When he spotted Marcus, his face lit up with a warm smile. "Marcus Turner," Sam said, walking over and clapping him on the shoulder. "Back again, huh? I told you this place has a way of keeping people around." Marcus chuckled softly. "Yeah, well, I guess I don't have anything better to do." Sam grinned, clearly seeing through him. "You keep telling yourself that. Come on, I got something for you." Marcus followed Sam into the gym, where a group of teenagers were playing basketball. Among them, Marcus immediately spotted DeAndre. The boy was moving across the court with an intensity Marcus recognized fast, sharp, trying to prove something. DeAndre had the ball and was weaving through the other players like they were standing still. With one last, powerful step, he jumped and sank the ball through the net. It was a clean shot, and the group erupted into cheers. DeAndre allowed himself a small smile, but quickly covered it up, jogging back down the court. "Kid's got talent," Marcus said quietly, watching him. Sam nodded. "Yeah, he does. And a lot of fire. Trouble is, he doesn't trust anyone enough to let them help him use it." Sam turned to Marcus with a thoughtful expression. "Maybe that's where you come in." Marcus frowned. "Me?" "You've got his attention," Sam said. "Whether you know it or not. Kids like DeAndre, they need someone they can look at and say, 'That guy gets me.' He sees that in you." Marcus was quiet, watching DeAndre make another shot. He was not sure if Sam was right, but something about the idea stuck with him. "Come on," Sam said. "Let's see if we can get him to sit still for 5 minutes." It took some convincing and a little bit of lighthearted bribery involving pizza, but eventually, Marcus found himself sitting across from DeAndre at a folding table in the corner of the gym. The boy had his hood up again, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He slouched in the chair like he wanted to be anywhere else, his expression carefully neutral. "What do you want?" DeAndre asked flatly, not meeting Marcus's eyes. "To talk," Marcus said simply. DeAndre snorted. "I don't feel like talking." "Fine," Marcus replied. "Then I'll talk and you listen." DeAndre rolled his eyes but did not leave. Marcus took that as a small victory. "You're good at basketball," Marcus said, his voice calm. "Really good?" DeAndre shrugged, though Marcus caught the flicker of pride in his expression. So, what are you going to do with it?" Marcus leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. "You've got talent. That's more than a lot of people have. You could play for your school, maybe get a scholarship one day." DeAndre scoffed. "A scholarship? Man, no one's handing me anything. I'll be lucky to make it out of this neighborhood in one piece." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do." DeAndre finally looked at him, his eyes hard. "You think I haven't seen how this works? My cousin tried to play ball. He was good, better than me. Guess what? He got caught up in some stupid mess and ended up in jail. Now he's just another story people tell to scare kids like me." Marcus stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. He knew DeAndre believed every word of it, because Marcus had felt the same way at his age, that the world was stacked against him, that nothing good could come out of trying. But he also knew that giving up led nowhere. "You're right," Marcus said quietly. "The world's not fair. People like you and me, we don't get handouts. We don't get second chances handed to us on a silver platter. But that doesn't mean you stop trying." DeAndre narrowed his eyes. "Why do you care, huh? You don't even know me." "Because I used to be you," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "I grew up in a place like this, feeling like the world had already decided I wasn't worth anything. I was angry at everybody, my teachers, my mom, the cops, the people who had what I didn't. But all that anger just held me back." DeAndre stared at him, silent. "It took me too long to figure that out," Marcus continued. "And when I finally did, I realized I had wasted so much time waiting for the world to change when I should have been changing myself." DeAndre looked away, his jaw working as if he was trying to decide whether or not to believe him. Marcus could see the wall starting to crack, even if just a little. "What's the point, though?" DeAndre muttered. "Even if I try, it's not like anything's going to change." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his tone softening. "You don't know that. But if you give up now, you're making the choice for yourself. Don't let the world decide what you can or can't do, DeAndre. You got something special. Don't waste it." DeAndre was quiet for a long moment. Then, without looking up, he said, "What if I mess it up?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Then you get back up and try again." The boy glanced at him, searching his face like he was looking for a lie. Finding none, DeAndre finally sighed. "You're annoying. You know that?" Marcus chuckled. "Yeah, I've been told." That afternoon, Marcus sat outside the community center, watching as kids came and went. DeAndre was among them, his hood still up, his face carefully guarded. But before he left, the boy glanced back at Marcus and gave him the smallest, not a quiet acknowledgement that felt like a victory. Sam appeared beside Marcus, hands tucked into his coat pockets. "You got through to him," he said simply. Marcus shook his head. "Barely." Sam smiled. "Sometimes barely is all it takes. You just keep showing up, Marcus. That's how trust is built, one day at a time." Marcus looked out at the street, the afternoon light casting long shadows on the pavement. He still did not know if he was making a difference, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was doing something that mattered. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The next few weeks slipped into a rhythm Marcus had not experienced in years. Each morning, he clocked in for his shift at the warehouse, where the days dragged on with the familiar repetition of lifting boxes, scanning labels, and punching out at the end of the day. But something had changed. It was not just about surviving anymore. Now, there was the Peters Community Center. Marcus found himself showing up after work almost every day. At first, it was to keep a promise he had made to himself that he would just show up. But soon, the center became a place where Marcus felt needed. Sam greeted him each day with a pat on the shoulder and words of encouragement. Clara dropped by now and then, giving him that knowing look that said, "I told you this would be good for you." And then there was DeAndre. On a gray Wednesday afternoon, Marcus found DeAndre alone in the gym, shooting hoops. The echoes of the basketball bouncing against the hardwood floor filled the quiet space. Marcus leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching the boy for a moment before speaking. "You gonna leave me out? Or can I get in on this?" Marcus called out. DeAndre paused mid-dribble and glanced at him, the faintest smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. You play? Used to, Marcus replied, stepping onto the court. I may be rusty, though, so go easy on me. DeAndre tossed him the ball. Marcus caught it, feeling the familiar weight settle into his palms. It had been years since he had stepped onto a court, but the muscle memory came back as soon as he took his first shot. The ball arched cleanly into the air and dropped through the net with a soft swish. DeAndre raised an eyebrow. Not bad for an old guy. Marcus laughed. Old guy? Come on. I'm not that ancient. He tossed the ball back to DeAndre. Your turn. Let's see what you've got. The two fell into a back-and-forth rhythm, shooting, dribbling, talking. At first, the conversation was light. DeAndre talked about basketball, his favorite teams, his favorite players. But as they kept playing, something shifted. Marcus passed the ball to DeAndre, watching as the boy hesitated mid-dribble. You ever think about playing for a team? Marcus asked casually. DeAndre shrugged, avoiding his gaze. What's the point? There you go again, Marcus replied. What did I say about making the choice for yourself? DeAndre tossed the ball hard against the floor, catching it as it rebounded. You don't get it. Then tell me, Marcus said, his voice calm. Help me understand. For a moment, DeAndre said nothing. He stared at the basketball in his hands like it held all the answers he did not know how to find. Finally, he muttered, My brother used to say the same thing. Said I should play ball, focus on something good, but he got locked up before he could see me play. Marcus's chest tightened. What happened? DeAndre shrugged again, his voice flat. Wrong place, wrong time. He was trying to look out for me, but he got caught up with the wrong people. Now he's just gone. Nobody talks about him anymore. Marcus watched DeAndre carefully, seeing the pain the boy was trying so hard to hide. He knew what it felt like to carry that kind of weight, to feel like the world had taken something from you, and there was nothing you could do about it. DeAndre, Marcus said quietly, your brother's story doesn't have to be yours. DeAndre looked up, his eyes sharp. How do you know that? Because I've seen it happen, Marcus replied. I've seen what happens when people give up and let life pull them under. You're not your brother, and you're not the people around you. You're you. You can still decide where you go from here. DeAndre's gaze dropped back to the floor, his shoulders slumping slightly. It's not that easy. I didn't say it was easy, Marcus said gently. But it's worth it. You got talent, kid. Don't waste it. DeAndre let the ball drop from his hands, letting it roll across the court. He stood there for a moment, quiet, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up at Marcus, a flicker of something vulnerable in his eyes. You think I could play for a team? DeAndre asked softly. Marcus nodded. I know you could. You just need someone in your corner. DeAndre stared at him for a moment longer before nodding slowly. It was not much, but Marcus knew that was as close to a breakthrough as he was going to get. Later that afternoon, Marcus found Sam in the main office, organizing papers at his desk. Got a minute? Marcus asked, stepping inside. Sam looked up, smiling. For you? Always. Marcus sat in the chair across from him, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I want to help DeAndre, he said firmly. Sam's expression softened, and he nodded knowingly. I figured you might. What do you have in mind? Marcus hesitated. I don't know yet, but that kid's got something. He just needs someone to believe in him. Sam sat back in his chair, studying Marcus. You know, when you first walked in here, I saw a man carrying a lot of weight on his shoulders. But look at you now, already looking out for someone else. Marcus smiled faintly. I guess I see myself in him. Sam nodded. DeAndre's got fire, but he's got a lot of walls up too. Keep showing up for him, Marcus. That's the most important thing you can do right now. Marcus leaned back in his chair, letting Sam's words sink in. Keep showing up. It was simple advice, but it was starting to feel like the foundation of everything Sam believed. Thanks, Sam, Marcus said quietly. Don't thank me yet, Sam replied with a grin. You've still got work to do. That evening, Marcus sat on the small couch in his apartment, staring at the blank TV screen. The room felt quiet in a way that reminded him of how things used to be, empty and still. But tonight it felt different. The community center was starting to feel like a part of him. Sam's steady presence, Clara's persistence, DeAndre's stubborn defiance. For so long, Marcus had convinced himself he was just one person in a world that would never change. But now he was starting to see the truth. Change did not happen all at once. It happened in moments, one step forward at a time. His phone buzzed on the table, snapping him out of his thoughts. He picked it up and saw a text from Clara. "Clara, heard you got through to DeAndre today. Nice work, Marcus. Proud of you." Marcus smiled, shaking his head. He typed a quick reply. Marcus, still figuring it out. "But thanks." He set the phone down and leaned back against the couch, letting out a long breath. For the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was moving forward slowly, maybe, but forward nonetheless. And as he sat there in the quiet, he thought of DeAndre and the promise he had made to himself weeks ago. Just show up. Tomorrow he would do it again. The sound of sneakers squeaking on polished wood echoed through the gym, mixed with the sharp bounce of basketballs and bursts of laughter. Marcus stood at the edge of the court, arms crossed, watching as DeAndre and a handful of other kids ran drills under the supervision of a wiry high school coach Sam had brought in for the day. It had been a week since their conversation on the court, and something had shifted in DeAndre. He was still guarded, still tough, but Marcus could see the spark of focus when the ball was in his hands. Today, for the first time, DeAndre looked like he belonged, not just to the game, but to something bigger than himself. Sam stood beside Marcus, hands on his hips, a proud smile on his face as he watched the kids. "You see that?" he said, nodding toward DeAndre. "That's what happens when you give a kid a reason to try." Marcus nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "He's good." Some chuckled. "He's better than good. He's got the kind of talent you can't teach." He turned to Marcus. "And that's partly because you gave him something he didn't have before, someone who believed in him." Marcus looked at Sam, shaking his head. "I didn't do much." "You showed up," Sam said simply. "That's more than most people do." Before Marcus could respond, the whistle blew, and the kids broke into smaller groups to practice shooting. DeAndre grabbed a water bottle and flopped onto the bleachers, his face glistening with sweat. Marcus hesitated for a moment before walking over and sitting beside him. "Looking sharp out there," Marcus said casually. DeAndre took a long sip of water and shrugged. "It's just practice." "Practice matters," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "You keep this up, you'll be ready for the school team tryouts next month." DeAndre scoffed, but the sound lacked its usual edge. "Tryouts? Man, I'm not wasting my time with that." Marcus turned to him, his brow furrowed. "Why not?" DeAndre stared at the court, tapping his water bottle against his knee. "Because guys like me don't make it. They'll pick the kids who already know somebody, or the ones who can afford the gear. I'll just look stupid for even trying." Marcus leaned back, crossing his arms. "You really believe that?" DeAndre hesitated before muttering, "Yeah, it's just how it works." "No, it's how you think it works," Marcus said. "But let me tell you something, you've got a shot. And if you don't take it, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you had." DeAndre glanced at him, his face carefully guarded. "You don't get it, don't I?" Marcus shot back, his voice calm but firm. "You think I haven't stood exactly where you are? I told myself the same thing when I was your age, that I wasn't good enough, that it wasn't worth it. You know where that got me? Wasting years of my life being angry at the world." DeAndre's eyes narrowed. "So, what? You think everything's perfect for you now?" "No, Marcus Ribleith. But I'm not giving up on myself anymore. And I'm not giving up on you either." DeAndre stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked away, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Whatever, man," he muttered, but there was no heat in his voice. Marcus let the silence settle for a moment before speaking again, softer this time. "Look, no one's going to hand you anything, DeAndre. I'm not saying it'll be easy. But if you care about this, if you care about you, then you owe it to yourself to try. I'll help you. But you've got to show up for yourself, too." DeAndre said nothing, but Marcus could see the wheels turning in his head. The boy was thinking about it, and that was enough for now. The next day, Marcus arrived at the community center to find Clara sitting at one of the tables in the lobby, a steaming cup of coffee in front of her. "You're here early," Marcus said as he walked over. Clara looked up and smiled. "I could say the same for you." She studied him for a moment, tilting her head. "You look different, you know." Marcus frowned, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "Different how?" "Lighter, Clara replied simply. Like you're carrying a little less of the world on your shoulders. Marcus let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. I don't know about that. Clara sipped her coffee, her eyes still on him. Sam told me you're working with DeAndre. That's good, Marcus. Really good. Marcus shifted in his chair, suddenly uncomfortable. I'm just helping him figure some things out. That's all. You're doing more than that, Clara said. You're showing him something he's never seen before, that someone like him can win. That's not small. Marcus looked down at his hands, Clara's words settling in his chest like a quiet weight. He's got a long way to go, he said softly. We all do, Clara replied. But the first step is showing up. You're doing that, Marcus. And you're helping him do it, too. Marcus thought about that as he left the table and walked into the gym. DeAndre was already there, shooting hoops on his own. The boy's movements were focused, sharper than Marcus had ever seen. Marcus picked up a ball and walked over, bouncing it lightly against the floor. You're here early. DeAndre glanced at him, shrugging. I didn't have anything better to do. Marcus smirked. You've been practicing. Maybe, DeAndre muttered, taking another shot. The ball sailed through the net. Marcus caught the rebound and passed it back. Good. You're going to need it if you want to make the team. DeAndre stopped dribbling and looked at him, his face serious. You really think I can make it? Marcus met his gaze without hesitation. I know you can. For the first time, DeAndre did not argue. Instead, he nodded, a small but significant gesture. All right, he said quietly. I'll try. Marcus smiled, the words settling like a victory in his chest. Good. Let's get to work. The next few days were a blur of sweat, hard work, and quiet determination. Marcus showed up at the community center every evening, running drills with DeAndre, encouraging him when he stumbled, and pushing him to go further than he thought he could. It was not just about basketball anymore. It was about showing DeAndre that he was capable of more, that his story was not already written, that he could change its ending. And as Marcus watched DeAndre grow stronger, faster, and more confident with each passing day, something inside him began to heal, too. For so long, Marcus had felt like his own life had stalled, like he had nothing left to give. But now, he was starting to believe in something again, not just in DeAndre, but in himself. On the night of the tryouts, Marcus stood outside the gymnasium of Clayton Hill High, leaning against the wall as kids poured inside. DeAndre had walked in 10 minutes earlier, a nervous but determined look on his face. Marcus had given him a nod and said, "You've got this, kid." DeAndre had not responded, but Marcus could see the fire in his eyes. Now, all Marcus could do was wait. The gym doors creaked open, and Sam stepped out, holding 2 cups of coffee. Figured you could use one, he said, handing Marcus a cup. Thanks, Marcus replied, taking it. Sam leaned against the wall beside him, glancing at the gym doors. He'll be all right, you know. Marcus nodded. Yeah, I think so, too. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in years' hope. The quiet hum of voices filled the gymnasium at Clayton Hill High. Parents, coaches, and kids milled about in clusters, sharing nervous energy and excitement. The bleachers were half full, families scattered across them, waiting for the results of the basketball tryouts to be announced. Marcus sat toward the back, his elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the polished floor where the names would soon be called. He had never been in this kind of place before, not as a player, not as a supporter. But tonight, as he watched DeAndre sitting across the gym with the other hopefuls, Marcus felt something he could not quite name. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was hope. DeAndre sat quietly, his hands clasped between his knees, his eyes bouncing from the clipboard the coach held to the floor in front of him. The other kids were joking and laughing to ease the tension, but DeAndre stayed still, focused. Marcus had seen that look before on his own face, years ago, in the cracked reflection of a dusty mirror. It was the look of someone who wanted something so badly, but could not let themselves believe they deserved it. The coach, a tall man with a whistle hanging around his neck, blew sharply to quiet the room. All right, everyone. First, I want to thank you all for coming out. You worked hard tonight, and no matter what happens, I want you to remember that hard work always pays off, even if it doesn't look the way you expect. Marcus shifted slightly in his seat, his pulse quickening. The coach glanced down at the clipboard. If I call your name, step forward. Congratulations, you've made the team. The names started. The coach read them in groups of 3, and the kids whose names were called let out shouts of excitement, slapping high fives as they jogged to the center of the court. With each name that wasn't DeAndre's, Marcus felt the tension tighten across his shoulders. Then it happened. DeAndre Williams? For a moment, DeAndre didn't move. He sat frozen, like he wasn't sure he had heard it right. Marcus straightened up, watching as the boy's eyes widened, disbelief flickering across his face. Go on. One of the other kids nudged him. DeAndre stood slowly, trying to play it cool, but Marcus could see the way his hands trembled slightly. He walked to the center of the court, joining the group of boys who had already made the team. The faintest smile tugged at his lips, but he quickly hid it under that tough exterior. Marcus smiled to himself, feeling a warmth rise in his chest. The kid had done it. Later that evening, as the gym began to empty, Marcus waited by the exit, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets. Families hugged and congratulated their kids, voices echoing through the space. DeAndre finally appeared, his backpack slung over one shoulder. When he spotted Marcus, he hesitated for a moment before walking over. You did it, Marcus said, smiling. DeAndre shrugged, trying to look nonchalant. Yeah, I guess. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Don't downplay it. You earned this. DeAndre finally let the mask slip just a little, his face softening. I didn't think I'd make it. Well, you did, Marcus said. And it's just the start. Keep working, and you'll go further than you think. DeAndre shifted his weight awkwardly, then looked up at Marcus. You're going to keep coming to the center, right? The question caught Marcus off guard. He blinked before answering. Yeah, of course. DeAndre nodded, his voice quieter now. Cool. He paused, staring at the floor. Thanks, for everything. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He wasn't sure how to respond at first, so he settled on the truth. Anytime, kid. DeAndre smirked faintly, adjusting his backpack. Don't get all sappy on me. Marcus chuckled. You'd better get out of here before I embarrass you in front of everybody. DeAndre rolled his eyes and walked off, disappearing into the night. Marcus watched him go, the faint smile still lingering on his face. When Marcus pulled into his apartment complex that night, the lot was quiet, save for the faint buzz of a flickering streetlight. He climbed the stairs to his unit, the familiar creak of the steps beneath him. But tonight, the worn-out surroundings did not feel as heavy as they usually did. Inside, Marcus dropped his keys on the table and flopped onto the couch, letting out a long breath. The silence of the room wrapped around him, but it was not the same kind of silence he had known before. He thought about DeAndre, about the moment his name had been called, about the look of disbelief on his face. Marcus remembered that feeling too. When life had spent so long knocking you down, even the smallest win felt like something impossible. But DeAndre had done it, and in helping him, Marcus realized something he had not expected. He was healing, too. For so long, Marcus had believed he had nothing to offer, that his life was just something he had to get through, one paycheck at a time. But Sam had been right. Sometimes showing up was all it took to change someone else's life. And sometimes it changed your own, too. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling him out of his thoughts. Marcus leaned over and picked it up. It was a message from Sam. Sam, the kid made the team, but you already knew that. Nice work, Marcus. Proud of you. Marcus smiled faintly, shaking his head. Then another message popped up from Rebecca this time. Rebecca, haven't heard from you in a few days. Everything okay? Marcus paused for a moment before typing back. Marcus, yeah, everything's good, Becky. I'll call you tomorrow. As he set the phone down, Marcus leaned back against the couch and stared at the ceiling, feeling the quiet settle in again. But this time, it was not empty. It felt full of possibility, of purpose. He thought of Sam, of Clara, of the kids at the community center. He thought of DeAndre, who was probably already practicing his jump shot somewhere, afraid to let himself believe he could go even further. Just show up. Sam's words echoed in Marcus's mind, steady and clear. That was how it started. You showed up, and you kept showing up, even when it was hard, even when you thought no one noticed. Marcus knew it now. Change happened slowly, in small moments that seemed insignificant at first. But those moments added up. Marcus smiled to himself, letting the thoughts settle deep inside him. He had no idea what the road ahead would look like for DeAndre, for himself, or for the community center. But for the first time in years, he was not afraid of what was coming. He would keep showing up. The night was still as Marcus sat on his worn couch, staring out the window at the faint glow of streetlights. The events of the past few weeks settled over him like the steady hum of distant music, a rhythm that had slowly come together, one note at a time. Helping DeAndre reminded Marcus that people weren't meant to go through life alone. A kid who thought he didn't matter found his place on the team. A man who thought he had nothing to offer discovered he was wrong. All it took was showing up and choosing to care. Marcus's phone buzzed softly on the table again, a small message from Sam. Sam, big wins start small. Proud of what you've done. See you tomorrow. Marcus set the phone down and smiled, his heart feeling a little lighter. Tomorrow, he would show up again, and the day after that too. He didn't know where this road would lead, but for the first time, he was ready to keep walking it one step at a time. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness change everything. Maybe you'll be the person to lift someone up, or maybe you're the one who needs a hand right now. Either way, remember to show up. Be there for someone, even when you think it's not enough. You never know how far that ripple will go. If you enjoyed Marcus and DeAndre's story, and if it inspired you even a little, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you're helping bring more stories like this to life, stories of hope, resilience, and the power of kindness. Hit that subscribe button now and join us for more stories that remind us the road ahead is tough, but we can walk it together. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.